friend, and welcome to the Worthy to Lead podcast. I am your host, Christiana Corona, and I am so glad to have you with me today. This is a special edition episode from the cabin. It's up north in Grand Marais, Minnesota, so shout out to anyone who is from Grand Marais or has been to Grand Marais. It is absolutely beautiful right now. I'm so thrilled to be here. I'm so excited for today's episode, where I get to interview someone that I have had the joy of collaborating with for years. And we are really going to go into some interesting topics that I think are often limiters for leaders. They're things like anxiety and doubt and, really questioning your self-worth and how that feels in your body, and then also how you project that to your teams. So for those of you who don't know Eric, I will just give you a quick synopsis of the amazing human that he is. First of all, Eric is a seasoned product management expert with 18 plus years of experience, mostly focused on e-commerce, but he's also had some stints in healthcare and online advertising. And he's led product teams, product leaders, and a lot of that has been around fostering an environment that is collaborative and innovative. Eric's leadership philosophy centers on presence and kindness and transparency. They're cornerstone for him to be an effective manager, but I think they're also really fundamental in building great teams. So throughout his career, Eric has developed a deep understanding and proficiency for product management and for leadership, and he's really focused on motivating teams, helping them be productive, and really tapping into their creative abilities. So he has this great mix of both, the business side, the product side, and he really is a creative as well. He has some very cool art if you haven't seen it before. Outside of his professional achievements, he has recently launched a YouTube channel, which we will be talking about more today. And this is focused on self-worth, positive mindset training, and authentic presence. He, like I mentioned, he also creates digital illustrations, and he's a proud dog dad to two dogs, Bella and Berkeley. All right. With that, let's dive in and meet Eric. Hey, Eric. Thank you for coming on the show today. I'm so glad to have you here.
Hey, Christiana. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, by the way.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
So I've kind of given my listeners a little brief overview of who you are. But I would love it if you could share a little bit more about your journey and, what really got you to where you are today.
And I appreciate the intro, by the way. But yeah, based on what you had mentioned, I spent roughly like 18 years within product management. So my career has been, generally focused on like business. I've always been interested in people, right? Like just how people interact with each other, different emotions, all that kind of stuff. And so like I was naturally gravitating towards psychology and like trying to figure out like, okay, well, why do we behave the way we behave? But then I don't know, life sort of has its, it's just random stuff happens, right? So then I found myself actually kind of veering into a business career. So moving into retail after college, and then after retail, moving into product management, because I had a lot of friends who were software engineers, and they're like, "Hey, Eric, there's this like new thing called product management." This is again 18 years ago, so just aging myself. It's sort of a career that I ended up like falling into, but aligned with a lot of my passions, aligned with the passions that I have for people, aligned with passions I had for technology and just solving problems. So that's sort of where the people aspect started to shine through. And that's where kind of it led me into people leadership. So like leading teams or leading leaders. And that's where I found myself at the sort of like current moment. I'm on a sabbatical right now. But that led me to the point where I was leading a group of leaders within product management.
It's so interesting how career paths just have that sort of organic way of getting us to where we need to go, right? Like you probably never in a million years thought that this would be like the 18 years that you would spend in your life would be focused on product, right? But how amazing that those skills and those passions that you had started to develop in college actually were extremely useful in that field.
Yeah, it is interesting just how that sort of like works. It's almost like the universe is like figuring things out for you, and you just have to like, a lot of it is like trust. And I feel like that's, just kind of even thinking about like your podcast about like worthy to lead, and this is why I'm excited to be on your podcast, is that even through that journey, like going through college and like, finding myself in a career in product management and leading people, there's still a journey of like self-worthiness and finding, the value, that true value that you have inherently. I feel very like grateful for the experiences that I've had, like all the people that I've met and learned from throughout my career has been amazing. The products that I got to work on have been amazing. But at the same time, there has been sort of this kind of an evolution, like we all grow, but like through actually figuring out how to see myself as having worth, like inherently. That's why I think like, and we can all relate to that. I think probably as leaders, a lot of us can relate to that. Sometimes we find ourselves in a position where we're expected to be an expert. We put a lot of expectations on ourselves. And then we start to question, like, how did I get here? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, well, how did I get to product management? It just seemed to happen. So it's been quite the journey, but one that's been really fruitful and one that's been eye-opening. It's been up and down. There's been challenges, there's been good stuff, but all of it I think is good. I mean, all of it, when you look at it kind of back and kind of replay things, everything is for kind of internal growth, or for growth, basically, is the way I see it.
Yeah, I really hear that shining through in some of the content that you put out there. Just the wisdom of being able to really look back and say, it's not just the good things I'm thankful for, it's also the challenges, the stumbles, the times where I didn't feel worthy, so that through that process, now you know what that feels like. Now you know the
Right.
difference, and you can
Yeah.
help guide other people, which I think is so cool.
Cool.
So you and I met, I was trying to calculate like how many years ago it was. I think maybe 10 years ago, which
Probably.
is
Yeah.
seems wild. So we were both working, together on products. So I was in design, you were in product. We collaborated quite a bit on bringing digital experiences to life, and it was exhilarating. It was fun. We did a lot of fast-paced work, but it was also very stressful. And I remember about you, which I think is so interesting, that no matter what the situation was, you always showed up with kindness and, with a smile for people, and somehow a sense of calm amidst all of that chaos. Not everyone can handle those really difficult situations that way, with grace, or really help others through that and treat other people as human beings when we're in this place of intensity or this place of stress. So I'm curious, what helped you to show up with that level of calm and kindness for others, even when things did feel like completely chaotic?
Yeah. I think it was 10 years ago. I just remember back in the day, like we were sitting really close to each other. And I
Yes.
got the same sense from you, by the way, Christiana. But here's the thing, like, so there's a part of me that is like, I hear that and I'm like, kind of reject it. I'm like, nope, you don't know what was going on inside. I found that this is why we get into like leadership, is because there's an empathic part of us. There's a part of us that likes to see others succeed, and wants to help them succeed, and gets gratification on seeing others grow. There's something just beautiful about that. And like when I would show up at work, like if you're a sensitive person or if you're empathetic, a lot of it is just understanding like the energy that's around you. And I would always want to work in a harmonious environment. Like that is like deal for me. Like I want to work where I feel like there's harmony, at least, to a certain, like it's not going to be perfect, of course. It's not going to be like a utopia. That's just the way life is. But if I can at least help and be a part of that, and make sure everyone feels calm, make sure everyone feels like they're self-assured, make sure that I listen too. I think that was the other thing, is like, this is what I kind of learned through like applied psychology as well. It's just like how to ask the right questions, and how to listen, like how to just like shut up and like listen. And so those are some of the things I would always bring with at work, to try to create that environment where people felt like they could just, hey, no matter what happened, we got it. Now, what goes on in the inside was obviously sometimes it's a little bit different. Like there are moments where I felt very calm and confident, but then things do get challenging and things get chaotic. And there were times inside where I felt myself not feeling like I was worthy, or feeling very anxious about what could happen. And a lot of what I would do too, and there's a fine line to this, I think, as well, is people please. I wanted people to be happy, right? Like if I want a harmonious environment, that means I want people to be happy. But then that would also reflect as like, well, I want people to be happy with me too. And so you kind of can see where that like line gets drawn, right? Like we want to make an environment that is authentic, where everyone's present. But at the same time, I had to learn quite a few lessons about like how to actually naturally exude that, and then not turn that inward and not say like, well, because this thing didn't work out perfectly harmoniously, now it's my fault. Now I did something wrong. It's like, no, I need to stop. It's like, stop doing that. Stop. And then also not projecting, like I would end up projecting some of my insecurities onto situations or onto people too. So it's interesting. There's always two sides to the same coin. It's like, yeah, I like working in an environment that's harmonious, but at the same time, there's still, this internal thing. Like outwardly, it looks great, but then internally, sometimes
Yeah.
it's not.
It's kind of like the duck on the water that looks perfectly calm on the surface, and underneath the water, the feet are
Yeah, it's like
paddling.
fluttering. Yeah, exactly. That's a perfect analogy.
But there's something powerful to being able to slow other people down too, like
Hmm.
being able to just think things through. And like you said, listen, because I
Hmm.
think, being a partner with people in product, and I want to pause and like make sure we actually explain what product is, because I know there's
Sure.
probably some people who don't exactly know what product management is. They're not in tech. And so I'd love for you to like give an overview of kind of what that day to day looks like, and how that feels, because I think for a lot of people, they externalize that stress. They
Hmm.
take what they're feeling inside and just it's everywhere and everyone gets it.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, that doesn't always lead to great decision making. That doesn't always lead to the right kinds of collaboration. And so I think there's something really interesting. It's like that stress is going to be there. We know it's going to be there. It happens to all of us. But what do you do with that, right?
Yeah.
So we'll get back to that. But I want you just to take a moment, please, and
Uh-huh.
explain what product management is. You've done it for 18 years. You've
Perfect.
seen a
Yeah.
lot, my friend.
That sounds good. Yeah. We can definitely put a pin in that. But you definitely, yeah, hit the nail on the head on like how to build environments where we like respond versus react. Like that was a big thing. But yeah, product management. So for those who don't know like what product management is, um, product management is sort of this role where you're an individual contributor, generally speaking, and you're responsible for essentially the success of a product. And when we talk about products, we're talking about technology products. So, as an example, I used to work on cart and checkout. So, if you check out on an e commerce site, maybe cart and checkout is considered a product. And it's a product manager's responsibility to, number one, be super collaborative. So there's like a product team. So there's teams that are building these products, designers, engineers. So these are creative problem solvers, you name it, experts in their fields, highly skilled. And as a product manager, same thing, problem solver, creative, skilled. But the product manager's role is to make sure that we're making good decisions and that we're partnering with the right people we need to partner with to make sure that that product, when it's out in front of a consumer, that it's successful or that we're learning from it or that we're delivering value to the end consumer and that we're making good decisions. All of that through, though, others. Like a lot of it is like working through others, taking into consideration what people are saying. There's a lot of opinions, there's a lot of facts, using all of that information and then helping to guide the product. And then also at the same time, communicating outward. So not only are you responsible for the product, but it's really important for you to talk to leadership, like make sure that they know where the product's headed and then get feedback too. Leadership outwardly, your peers, and then down too. So anyone who's supporting your product operationally or whatever. That's sort of the idea. And that's why I think the role itself is like any role, there's a lot of interesting stresses that come with it. There's a lot of stresses around like you're never going to make anyone happy. And so that's why, when we talk about like people pleasing, like my thing, it's like you have to be able to be comfortable saying things how they are. And if something's not good, we need to be able to articulate that clearly so we can respond to that in a way that's mature. Does that help? Is there anything that you think would
Yes.
be good to add?
I think that's amazing. I would just add, it's interesting how you describe your role, because it sounds a lot like both a leadership role, but also a facilitator. And when you talk about, I'm not the one making the thing, right? Like the
Mhm.
engineers are making the thing, designers are making things, and we're all kind of working together to make those things come to life. It requires so much more fluency with people, right? Because when you're not the one controlling all of that, it's a lot of this is out of your control. So there's certain decisions that you make, but then there's things that other people do, and then you have to influence them to get things done. And
Uh-huh.
to say like, is this the right way to go? Do we want to try
Yep.
something else? Should we experiment with something else? What's the risk? And so you're weighing all of these decisions while also not having like the full breadth of control over how it actually gets made, which is a really unique position to be in. And I think it like certain people that can be really stressful for them, but I love kind of your approach and how you've thought about that, because I think you do think about the whole. So it's not just you and your role and what makes you look good, or how do you get successful, but you're thinking on
Mhm.
behalf of the team.
Yeah, you have to. I mean, that's I think that sort of defines difference between sort of what a good product manager is and a great product manager is one that there's that the people aspect to it that's super important. And then you're touching on this right now too. Is this idea of empowerment? It's sort of like, oh, I feel like there's certain things that are in my control and certain things that are out of my control. When in essence, we just have to exist in the moment instead of thinking about what I can and can't control, like looking for that sense of empowerment within and then working with what you have. The product manager obviously needs to evangelize the product, but then to a certain degree it's like, okay, well, what do I have to work with and how do I think creatively within these, because everything needs to be constricted in some ways. That's how creativity works. It's like you create some bounds and then you try to work within that or figure out how to go outside of those bounds.
Yeah,
So
I love that.
it is a really fun job, but you're right. It could be high stress for sure, for sure. And everything ebbs and flows. Like there are moments where it's stressful and there are moments where it's not stressful. It's just the natural way of things, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. I think there were a lot of things that you saw throughout that period of time, right? That, there were
Mhm,
some specific concerns that you had called out, like things, behaviors or paths that were leading people to burnout or stress, or certain things that were
mhm.
characteristic of that role. And so I'm curious, like you sort of went down this path of self-discovery and, trying to figure out like what is your methodology, right? Like how are you combating those things that are very common in that type of a role. So
Mhm.
can you talk a little bit about your journey and like
Yeah.
what did you discover there?
Yeah. I mean, I experienced burnout pretty severely within the job. And to be fair, this is, this is all sort of like an internal journey too, right? Like when you think about burnout, there's like, what is it that I could have done differently and like through self-reflection to help, that too. So that way, like, yes, I experienced it, but then maybe others don't need to experience it just as profoundly. But a lot of it had to do with sort of expectations that I think I put on myself. So this is probably like 3 years ago where, I was working on a really a very important initiative, this high pressure, right? Like, and that's what you'll find no matter where you go, technology companies, wherever you're gonna have high pressure things that you're working on, of course. Um, but I found myself like that really grappling with like seeing things sort of like not go like the way I wanted them to go, right? Like I was hoping things would go smoothly and said, okay, well, oh darn, we're finding, some issues. Like we didn't have certain teams lined up to help out, or maybe we were too late with our communication, or we missed a particular piece of functionality. We just missed it in the requirements. So that there are certain things that were happening that it felt almost like it was like a domino effect. It's like, well, one thing happened, then another thing happened, and then of course, yeah, people start to question trust. Like, oh man, like if this doesn't happen, what's going to happen next? So you start those human emotions start showing up too. Where it got to the point where I was anxious every morning. I'd wake up every morning. There were nights where I wouldn't sleep, and of course, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But I had to take time for myself, so I ended up taking a few weeks off of work just to give myself that reset moment. And then got back to work after 6 weeks and was lucky enough to move to a different product. But what I also found is that when I moved to a different product, I was still bringing some of those like
Mm.
mental things with me, right? So
You are who
naturally,
you are no matter what
right,
role you're
exactly.
in.
So it's like,
Yeah.
right, I'm like, here I am, like starting to get anxious again. And I was like, well, there has to
Mm.
be a different way. And there has to be something that's more than meets the eye. That's the way sort of I was starting to think about it. I was like, what is going on here? Like, I feel like there is, sometimes this happens, in corporate or different settings where there's sometimes a lot of suffering and you see suffering in others. You see people are really hard on themselves or hard on others. And I just don't think it has to be like that. I mean, it really doesn't.
Hmm.
And a lot of it came down to exactly what this podcast is about. Like Christiana is about self-worth, um, and like really understanding what that means. Like you could say self-worth and like say it to yourself, but then like experiencing it and understanding sort of like, well, what are some of the, like for me, I started literally, like was talking to friends, so like the network was really important, and then they were starting to point me at different things, like, hey Eric, have you read so and so, have you thought about meditating? There are certain things that they were pointing me towards where I hadn't considered, and I was just like, can I just be open to what other people are saying as I'm asking for help, which is also something that I wasn't good at. I wasn't good at asking for help because that would mean that I wasn't doing a good job, right?
That's hard. That's
Yeah,
hard
it
to
is.
admit. Yeah. Yeah.
So then, but then basically, what I had to like work on myself first, right? Like I have to heal sort of some of these things that I think are internal traumas too. Like we grew up in a world where we feel like we're conditioned to think that we don't have value, or like our value is associated based on what I own or what I do. And of course, those things are fine. Like I'm not saying that those things aren't fine. Like we should, yeah, if you want to be a VP or if you want to own a nice car or whatever, that's totally cool. But doing it in a way that's coming from a sense of wholeness, I think, is obviously the point here is like seeing yourself as like, I can actually handle any sort of situation that is presented to me. I can take time to relax, like you said, slow down, respond, and start building that practice. So for me, it was about practicing that too. So there's a lot of practice involved in learning to take a breath, learning to give yourself the benefit of the doubt, letting go of the past. That's another thing too. It's like realizing that you're not your past. Like you are just the person you are right now. And what you choose, you have a choice in the moment, every single moment. And you can make the choice that you feel is the most loving. You can make the choice that you feel is the most kind, the most wise. I mean, so you're in a position of empowerment right now, even though you might not know it. And so then that's sort of the path of the journey. Very high level. I mean, I could go into like a lot of different like things that I tried and have done, but then I wanted to try to like show up that way for my team. That was the other thing too. It's like, well, now I get to be this way for my team and share that with
Yeah.
them.
Oh, I love
So yeah.
that. So, as you were kind of experimenting with these things, that I'm sure there were things that felt like you felt a difference on the inside, and calmed your nerves on the inside, and started to calm that down. But how did you start seeing it manifest on the outside? Like, what were
Uh-huh.
some of the things your team started to notice about you as you changed?
Well, it was interesting because I think when I used to communicate, a lot of times I would want to be really positive. I still am positive, right? Like I think that's important. What you put out in the world will come back. Like so, put out positivity because generally speaking, it's going to come back. But I had some team members talk to me, and I've never heard this before because a lot of my feedback was like, Eric, you're really nice. But I started to get feedback from team members saying, Eric, you're shooting from the hip in a way that's not a bad thing. Like you're being transparent, like you're being honest. You can be honest and transparent and provide feedback, but doing it in a loving way and an understanding
Hmm.
way, in a way that you listen. So it was sort of an art. It's like, oh, I can help develop this team. There might be things that might be hard for someone else to hear, and that's fine. It's not going to end up in disaster, when I deliver this feedback to them. Like
Yeah,
this
like
is,
even if they're not happy in that moment and they may not like to hear it, there's something good in it for them.
right,
Yeah.
exactly, yes. And so like standing in that, and then realizing that it's not the end of the world. And so then I was, yeah, getting feedback like, oh, Eric, I appreciate how transparent you're being. I was like, okay, well, this is good.
Mhm.
I'm getting some good signs. And then I think too, just with like leadership as well. Like I stopped trying to sugarcoat things. So I was like, well, the leadership needs to know exactly where we're at. So this is what's on the roadmap. This is what's not
Ugh,
working. This is from a product's perspective, right? Like, so again,
yes.
for those who don't know about product management, this is one thing that you'd want to do is like make sure people know the state of the roadmap. Like this is releasing in a month, or this is going to be what we're going to be working on next year, or this is delayed because of X, Y, and Z. And that way, and then I would get feedback from leadership like, thank you, because now you're giving us stuff to work with. It's like, okay, I
Yeah.
see how this works now. I don't have to sugarcoat everything. I don't have to make everyone feel happy all the time. And I can stand in my truth, so to speak, be who I am authentically, and the results kind of just come, right? Like that's the thing. It's like not even about the outcomes anymore, even though I get it, like outcomes are important, clearly, but it's more about the journey, and then the outcomes are sort of like the icing on the cake. I
Hmm.
mean, it's weird how it works like that, but it does
Yeah.
tend to work like, maybe not all the time, but like most of the time it does.
I think that is so important. Just the idea of we are so hyper focused on the outcomes, aren't we? Like just
Yeah.
like especially
Mm-hmm.
product. Like what are the
Mm-hmm.
numbers?
Yep.
How are we
Mm-hmm.
proving our value? What does success look like? It's all about those outcomes. And what you're saying is kind of the opposite of that. Like if we focus on who we are, how we show up, how we do our best work, the outcomes come because we're developing ourselves and we're developing that pathway and that way of working that is actually more effective than if we're
Right.
just so hyper focused on the outcomes. I love
100%. Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's not even saying that outcomes don't, like, yes, of course we have them and we should talk about them. But then if we are constantly focusing on the outcomes too, sometimes what manifests is a fear state. You start to get fearful that you're not going to hit those
that.
numbers. And then no one, I mean, you know, this is working as a creative. I think you can't be your most creative when you're fearful or stressed out. Like it's literally
Exactly.
impossible. It's like a blocker. Like living in fear
Exactly.
is a blocker to creativity. And you want everyone to be able to exist within that creative state. So it's like, yeah, maybe we're not hitting this goal. Let's talk about it. Let's be honest about it. But let's exist in a state of presence, not fear, and figure out how we might be able to hit the goal. Or maybe we have to focus on something else. Maybe we need to change something. But that's exactly it. It's like focusing on who we are as individuals. And then especially as a leader, I think it's really important to like that, especially in this day and age of AI, where AI is taking care of like different types of tasks. The importance of a leader definitely focuses more on that. What we're talking about is like being present, eliminating fear, helping our teams become the most creative that they can be, um, helping them kind of figure out what their strengths are. You know what I mean? And this is the beautiful like thing about it too, about leadership, is that in some ways that's like the ideal like state of being a leader. You're there in the moment with your team. Like that is like
Yes.
ideal.
And I think there's something nice about the idea of, part of your ethos there of that ability to work in this new way was that there's this inherent belief that you're capable to figure it out, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if you weren't capable to figure it out, then you'd be constantly living in fear that the team wasn't going to get what they said done
Yep.
and, oh no, what are we going to tell leaders? But like when you can put all that down and focus on, no, we can figure this out and we have what we need, and starting from that belief, right, and that belief about yourself as a leader,
Mm-hmm.
I love that because then you choose different things, you take different paths, you take different risks, you say the truth without sugarcoating it because it's the truth and it is
Yeah.
what it is and we'll figure it out, right?
Yeah, yeah. No, I like that. I mean, you're spot on too. Like you do end up taking different paths. Like you might consider things that you normally wouldn't have considered because if you're assisting from a fear state, you're probably going to choose the less risky option. Um, and
Always.
maybe that ends up with milk. It's like, well, that's oatmeal. You know what I mean? The results are oatmeal. It's bland. It's like,
Yeah.
but no, I mean, you want to be able to like be able
Yeah.
to like think in terms of like, well, what are there's like almost an infinite amount of options. I mean, there's a lot of options that you can choose from. You would want to be in a state where you can actually think about those things in a way that's wise and like you're leveraging your experience and thinking about, what's best for your team. So yeah, I mean, 100% agree with you. Same wavelength.
Awesome. So you share some great life coaching videos on your YouTube channel, and we'll definitely get to those in a moment. But first, I want to dive a little bit deeper into a couple of areas of focus that I know that my listeners are going to be interested in. And the first area is how you've really been able to shift your relationship with performance anxiety and how that shows up in the workplace. So, that feeling that we get when we have a big meeting or a presentation that we really have to lead with confidence. Maybe there's a tough conversation that we need to have and really share that honest, tough truth. Or perhaps we're going into an interview and we just have that nervous, jittery energy that's flowing through us, and we want to try and figure out how to handle that. You have some really interesting tips on this day-to-day anxiety management, which I think are really effective. And then the second area I want to dive into is really around self-worth as a leader, which
Mhm.
we were touching on a little bit earlier. So on a deeper level, you've worked through not feeling like you're enough, always having to perform at that higher level and to be more, to do more, to doubt if you have what it takes to truly lead, because I think we've all gone through those things, but you have some really amazing perspectives on this one that I definitely want you to share. So let's start
Yeah.
out with the first one, the anxiety in the workplace.
Yeah.
Um, Being a leader in a product, company. You mentioned in the past that you are faced with the Sunday scaries.
Yes.
So, like looking ahead to your week, looking at all the
Uh-huh.
meetings you have to lead, all of those things that are coming up, and just, feeling that sense of doubt or anxiety. So, what really helped you to start feeling differently about the job to be done for the week?
Yeah. A lot of it has to do with sort of like your inner monologue. Like, so the way that you talk to yourself. Here's the way I look at it. Like, sometimes I think the mind can be a little mean. It's like saying stuff about yourself that's not true. It's like, and then you also have to think about sometimes like whatever the mind says. If a person actually said that to you or a friend said that to you, would you really keep that person around? Highly doubtful. And so it's like being aware
Yeah.
of like when you're talking negatively about yourself, like, oh, I don't think I can handle this. Like, oh, the week is looking terrible. There's too many meetings. I can't handle it. Like, even just like becoming aware of when we're limiting ourselves, like these self-limiting thoughts, whether it's about a situation, like I can't handle it, or we think like something is happening to us, like, oh, this keeps happening to me. I keep getting 8 meetings on Friday afternoon. You know what I mean? Like, and then after I started becoming aware of like, okay, well, this is how I'm talking to myself, like trying to slowly shift that. Like, it doesn't happen overnight, but it's like, can I just at least compliment myself once in a while, like, or everything's going to be
Yes.
okay, right? Like, that's the other thing. The next thing would be projecting positivity or projecting things working out, like visualizing that actually the week's going to be just fine. and,
Mhm.
and and seeing myself at the end of the week, it's like seeing your future self where you are right now and just being like, I made it through. It's fine. Like, it wasn't that big of a deal. And generally speaking, when you do reflect, that's the case. It's like actually everything ended up pretty okay. Yeah, maybe the week was nuts here and there, or maybe there's something that I didn't expect popped up. But at the same time, it's all about sort of that mental frame of mind, that mental like frame of reference.
I love that.
Hmm.
So just focusing that positive energy, visualizing it forward and saying, actually, I'm going to interpret this situation differently. Like I'm just going to tell
Yep.
my brain. So how do you get yourself to believe yourself?
Yeah, I know. That's the interesting too. It's all through experience. That's really the only way to do it. It's sort of just like checking in with yourself. It's like, did I, like, when I think about like a performance anxiety, and I'm maybe nervous about making a speech or talking in front of leaders or something like that. And you talked about this. Yeah, there's some really kind of quick tips that we can use to help get ourselves in a state where we're more present. But a lot of it is sort of like just reflecting and saying, well, when this happened, did catastrophe strike? And generally speaking, because that's at least where my mind would go, it would sort of swirl into this, like, well, if this happens, then this person's going to think this, and then I'm going to say this, and it's not going to make any sense. And sort of like it ends up in this like weird thought spiral. And so the
Hmm.
idea is to like acknowledge when those things happen, and then to provide evidence, like as these things, like, and write it down, like, oh, actually, I had a really good week this week. Here's what happened. Here's what's happened. It's fine. And even if it didn't turn, let's assume it doesn't turn out fine. Let's assume maybe
Yep.
something screwed up. The other thing to notice is that no one else is perfect either. Like, yeah, I
Hmm.
stutter sometimes when I talk, or I say the wrong word or whatever, and then I get super, hypersensitive about it. But if I could just like realize that 99% of everybody else does that too, and then acknowledge when that actually happens, then I can see that I am in an imperfect world. I am an imperfect being. These sort of like expectations that I make for myself are kind of silly, like, why am I doing this to myself? And so you start you get yourself in sort of that perpetual sort of self-reflection cycle. And that's sort of how you have to kind of convince yourself. You have to sort of like see that actually is okay, and then keep practicing too. Like, that's the other thing too. It's like, I've never found that like things happen like, oh yes, the step of a finger and everything's fine, oh, everything's happy, no, it does seem to take time. Like, you do have to sort of put in a certain level of effort, especially um, the introspection part is really important, because I don't think we get taught how to do that, really, like how to be introspective and reflect, you know.
No. Like even when people say, "Hey, we should all do journaling. We should all do mindfulness." Like a
Mhm.
lot of people don't are like, "Well, what should I write?" Like
Yeah.
what do I
Or
even put down on the page? What's going
yeah
to be
when I
helpful later?
when I sit and meditate, I can't stop thinking, so please help me meditate, because I can't meditate, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah. So like for you, you mentioned a couple of things, but when you
Uh-huh.
do that introspection, you do that reflection exercise, like what are some of the specific things that you write down or think about that are useful? Like that you can go back
Yeah.
later and say, "Oh, I can check in on that. That
Uh-huh.
was what I expected or that wasn't what I expected."
Yeah. Well, what I would do, is I would write how I'm feeling before. Let's assume like I go to like I'm getting ready for like a meeting, and I would write down like here's how I'm feeling. Very, very simple. It doesn't have to be like I just a random scrap of paper, just so that way at least I put it on paper. And that allows you to do is obviously you can start looking at those things neutrally. So like the idea is to like how can I neutralize this thought in the moment? And so I would write those down. Okay, this is going to be terrible. Blah 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 blah. And then you actually look at it and you're like, okay, well this is, I mean, kind of a silly thought. Maybe you will judge it. Whatever. But then I would also then write down, well, what happened afterward? And so then I was like, okay, well, actually, everything went fine. There were some really good questions. There was some engagement. Maybe I messed up here or there, but that doesn't matter because actually everything was fine. So I could compare how I was feeling prior to the event and how I was feeling after the event. And that's the thing too. Like, I don't even like I'll journal sometimes, but it's not like I have this like journal that's like thick. I just literally use a piece of paper and write stuff down. That just works for me. I mean, maybe it will work for someone else, maybe not. That's fine.
But it's nice because it's flexible. So it sounds like it's not a really rigid practice for you. Like, oh, I always journal at 7 o'clock, and it's
Right.
4 pages long. But you just take in the moment the usefulness of that exercise and capture. Here's how I'm feeling and put it down. So literally you can put it down and not
really,
have
exactly,
it be in
correct.
your brain.
Yeah. I mean, there are some other things I would do too, like the whole gratitude exercises I think are important. I mean, because it's important to understand sort of like living from a sense of gratitude. Like when you live from a sense of gratitude, then you start to look at every single moment as like for you, like actually this event where I'm public speaking is a way for me to learn. Like it's a way for me to talk about what my team is doing. It's a way for me to spread joy. I could spread some happiness. Maybe there's an opportunity there. Maybe there's no moment to be honest and people need to hear, oh, this isn't going well. So I need to tell you. And so like looking at those things differently too, like that's the other thing. It's like, how can I like shift my mindset? It's like this, like, it's subtle, but it's also very like not subtle.
Very powerful indeed. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And I know that you also have some specific ways that you handle scenarios where, you're going into this, high pressure or high intensity thing and your body just feels a certain way, right? Like maybe you can get your thoughts out on paper, but maybe your body is still very stimulated and you're not feeling calm and present and like in the right mindset. And you have some interesting ways or interesting tips of biohacking our nervous system. I hadn't heard all of these before, so I would love if you could maybe just share your 5 biohacking tips for also helping, besides the mind, calm down the body.
I mean, it's such a good point too, Christiana. Like, yeah, there's the mind, but then the body does react. I mean, there is the manifestation of anxiety in the body, and it's just as important to look at and think about and just being like aware of than it is. It's just as important as thoughts. You mentioned this. I have a video on my YouTube channel about like biohacking yourself, especially when, and I do want to say too, obviously this is not medical advice. These are just very simple like hacks that you could try. It might work for you. Some might not. That's fine. But it's like things that I would do before like a meeting, and they generally would help. So if you are having a problem, like getting out of your own head, I would take a cold pack and put it across around my neck. And I would just have one stored in the freezer. So if I was ever at a point where I was feeling so anxious that I needed to sort of like jolt myself, especially if you have a highly sensitive nerve, if you're someone who's like has a turbo engine on your nervous system, and there are a lot of people like that. They rev up fast, and that's a thing. So like taking an ice pack and putting it on your neck is a good way to sort of jolt yourself out of that. In about 1 second, you'll think about cold, the cold on your neck.
You're gonna be like, what am I doing to myself? Yeah.
So it's sort of yeah, exactly. It's like how to short circuit your nervous system. That's one way to do it. Another thing I would always do is eat citrus fruit because like aromatherapy. So there's like something about citrus fruit that it has a calming effect on some people. For me, it's always been calming. So I'd always eat a grapefruit before. It's not like I'm eating grapefruits all day long, but I would eat grapefruit a lot at work.
So good, and it's delicious.
And it's delicious, and everyone should eat
Win-win.
more fruit. Win-win. Exactly. Yeah. Another thing is like breath work. So like breathing deep, and then quickly expelling. So like seeing yourself as sort of expelling or releasing the anxiety. So breathe in, and then breathing out very, very quickly is one way to do it too. And I know a lot of people practice breath work. And so there's a lot of different like things that you can do there. Another thing that I like to do is they're called mudras, or basically just like how you're like, watch how you're positioning your hands. So like, I mean, if you watch like maybe CEOs or executives, a lot of times they keep their hands together when they're talking. And a lot of that is to facilitate presence, because there's something about putting your hands together and putting your fingers together that kind of keeps you present in the moment. Yeah. So
I'm trying
sometimes
it
you
right
see
now.
this, try it right now. Right. To see what happens. You may look silly. It's like, okay, you're the mastermind here, with your hands together.
Yeah.
But it's, yeah, exactly. But it certainly does work. And it might help you just like being aware of sort of what you're doing with your body outside of the anxiety. Like, okay, can I put my hands together and keep my hands together and see if that facilitates presence? And the last thing I would do, this is just me and kind of cheesy, but I like to listen to happy music. And this is music that is like in a major scale. So like specifically should be happy music, something that's upbeat, something that has, again, like good beats per minute, so nothing sad.
What's a good level of beats per minute, for example?
I like 120. Like a 120 is
120?
pretty good.
Okay.
120 is like, which I think is, I don't know where
So
that lands.
music in a 120 with
Right.
that's upbeat, that is in a major
Okay.
scale.
Major
Okay.
scale. Yeah, there you go.
I'll
Perfect.
use that as my Spotify search.
There you go. Exactly. Yes. See how that works. See what kind of songs you get. I'd be curious to see.
I love it. I love it. And I know you have like a ton more tips, and I would highly encourage people to go check out the YouTube channel just to see, like you talk about this topic a lot. I think it's really important for people, and being able to connect their mind and their body and really think about both of those things in a connected state. And I also wanted to talk about beyond that sort of momentary anxiety, right? There's deeper levels of anxiety that a lot of people feel, and that doubt that really holds us back and limits the kind of risks that we're willing to take. And, thinking about like in your career, do you go for that more challenging role? Do you go for a job that is a level above what you've done before? Do you put your big idea out there? And, what is it that's actually holding you back? And like you mentioned, the Worthy to Lead podcast is really about helping us identify the things that are holding us back, that are keeping us stuck, and unlocking our ability as leaders to show up with a sense of worthiness. So I'm curious kind of what your top strategies would be as leaders for ways that we can reduce that deeper level of anxiety or doubt so that we can start operating, directly from that place of self-worth.
Yeah. So the word I would use, and this can be taken maybe different ways, but like it is kind of surrendering to the moment. And what I mean by surrendering to the moment is there's two sides of this coin. There's like what you're attached to, and then what you're resisting. And so like you think about like, oh, I have this big idea, right? Like I feel like this is like a really cool idea for a product or whatever, but there could be something that is getting in your way. So there's either an attachment to some sort of like distorted view that you have of yourself. So it's like, well, why am I not going forward on this? Am I attaching myself to sort of like, I'm not good enough? Am I There's also the other aspect of that is just resisting. So it's like the resistance of, this is why like procrastination is a thing. It's like, I want to be perfect. So I resist even trying, because what if I fail? It's like these what ifs.
Yeah.
And so the other thing is just realizing how futile sometimes, yeah, I get that we need to ask like, what if, like if we're planning and stuff like that, there's good like strategy in that. But when it comes to us personally, understanding that like at every single second of the moment, you are making choices. You literally are making a choice every single second of the day. Like there's no way around it. Like you're always making a choice. And so that's where it's like understanding that, okay, well, there is a sense of empowerment that comes with that. And if I'm a leader, I could look at myself and say, am I attaching myself to some of these things that are distortions? Like, am I a distorted view of myself? It's that imposter syndrome. Like, oh man, people are going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. Who's the imposter? Like, you have to ask yourself, like, who's actually creating the imposter, in this situation? Like, who's actually the one who's making the choice to create the imposter? Oh, that's actually me. Okay. And then you start pulling back the layers. You know what I mean? It's not like you pull back the layer, like, okay, well, that's me doing that. I'm not an imposter. Like everyone here has the same. And then also like seeing each other in some ways, you start to see each other as the same. Like if I'm whole, everyone else is. And so there's nothing to be afraid of. And so I can go after that idea, or I can help this person, or I can speak up, especially if I feel like something needs to be said. Because ultimately, if we're all coming from the same place of self-worthiness, you're just as worthy as I am. There's no hierarchy of worthiness. And so then you start operating from that perspective, and then that's how you kind of exist within a state of like that. I mean, you think about a team that thrives, like you have experience building teams that thrive, and I guarantee you it has everything to do with your presence, and that's really it. And so it's like, how can you unlock that state of presence and then reduce this sort of attachment that we have to sort of these ideas that we're not good enough, or resisting things within our experience that might actually be there for us to help us. It's like, oh, I don't want to do this speech. Oh, I don't want to do this presentation about an idea. Hold on. That might actually be a good thing for you, So,
yeah. Oh man. When you think about it that way, like what is for me, not just what is happening to me, but what is happening for me. I love that concept. You're really talking about kind of seeing things from a completely different perspective, and detaching yourself in some regards from the way that you've always done it, which is really hard, right? Like you maybe have these thought patterns your whole life, or you maybe grew up or were conditioned to think certain things about yourself. So it's like a lot of deep digging, right? Like a lot of excavating and kind of getting out of our own way with these beliefs that are really tightly held. So as you think about trying to do that more, like what are some of the tips that you have for people on just making progress in that area? I'm sure it can feel really hard because the first few times you're like, whatever, I don't believe it.
Yeah.
Like, am I really capable? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah. Right.
like, okay, here I am. We're on this podcast. We're doing video, right? Like,
Yep.
how do I know that I'm capable to do this? I don't know. But we're taking a risk and we're trying something new. And I'm just curious about your perspective on like what really has worked for you, or what advice do you give others around like the practice or developing that habit, and then when do you start to really see that progress emerge?
Yeah. One thing that I like to do, especially as it relates to sort of like self-limiting beliefs, is to like, and this is, again, if this works for people, great. If it doesn't, like the whole point is for me is just like, okay, well, how do you practically apply some of this stuff? Like one thing you could do is like literally pick one thing, like, and it could be any sort of label that you have on yourself. It doesn't even have to be work related. It could be the label I would put on myself would be like a dog dad, right? Like I'm a dog dad. I have two dogs. But then I have to ask myself, is that really who I am? You know what I mean? Like, is that just something I do? And I have dog, and I love my dogs, of course. It's not to say that there's nothing. I'm not saying that's wrong to think of yourself as a dog dad, but then like questioning these sort of things, like I've labeled myself as this, or I've labeled myself as I'm only good at data, and I'm not good at thinking about things outside of data, or I'm not good at data. Oh, numbers scare me. So can you just take one thing, literally, and that's it? Just focus on that, and just like give yourself an opportunity to say, I'm fine with numbers, or I'm going to give myself an opportunity to learn how to become comfortable with data. And so part of that is just like cracking yourself open. It's like if you can crack yourself open just a little bit, and like it's like letting the light shine through, so you got to let the light shine out. And then it's sort of just a process that you have to hold yourself accountable to. Like a lot of this is about self-accountability. So, and learning how to be accountable to yourself and to be accountable for how you react and respond in the moment. So when you're doing these things where it's like, yeah, I'm not good at data. Okay, hold on. Now I'm going to actually just focus on learning a little bit about data. And I'm going to prove to myself that I'm fine with it. It might take a couple of weeks. And then it's those tiny little success moments. Like this is something that a previous mentor and a boss of mine, she taught me. It was about like just defining small little success moments are okay. Because that gives you sort of like a little bit of grip. It's like you want grip because that's what you're saying. Like you're like, well, how do I actually make progress? But sometimes it's just those little tiny, small little things. And then it is a lot of it is sort of your network too, like this asking for feedback, or hey, how am I showing up? Am I doing a good job? Like literally and genuinely wanting to grow. And that in and of itself too can give you an opportunity to sort of look at yourself in a neutral light as well. So someone's like, I feel like I did a really bad job here. Well, this person's telling you like, that is completely false. I saw you speak in front of this crowd and you were awesome. Yeah. Stop thinking about that. And then I could be like, I'm going to think that Like give yourself an
Yeah.
opportunity to like integrate what some of the other people are saying about you too.
And
Um,
it is fascinating, right? Like when you look at yourself through someone else's eyes, what they see. And
yeah,
so many times what they're seeing is not all those self-critical things that we're saying to ourselves. Like, oh, I
right.
just totally messed that up. That was terrible.
Uh-huh.
I did such a horrible job. And they're like, you misspoke on one word.
Right.
Who
Whoop
cares?
de ding. Yeah, big deal. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
big deal.
I love that idea of just the continuous practice though. And I remember I was having this conversation recently with a colleague about like who was saying I'm not good at finance.
Hmm.
And getting over that hurdle of saying I'm not good at finance took, reading a lot of books and listening to a lot of podcasts and then trying a budget and then, talking to a financial advisor and then figuring out if they agree with the financial advisor and then working through that pathway of steps really starts to change that fundamental belief over time. Like you may not believe it at the beginning, but then after you've read x number of books and then you've practiced and you've talked to experts and then you've tried it and then you've learned from it, like at what point you get to that point where you can start saying, okay, well, I'm not that bad.
Yeah, right.
And
Yeah,
maybe you're
yeah,
10% better, maybe you're
yeah.
20% better, but you're not that bad. And then you
And
can
that's
take
okay too.
not
Yeah.
bad to like, oh, I'm a little bit better than that.
Yeah. And that's perfect too. That's exactly
Mm.
perfect. Like, it doesn't have to be like, I remember like I was so hard on myself. I don't know if you can relate, Christiana. Like, even when I was like younger in college, like if I didn't get something right away, I was so angry with myself. I remember going skiing once with my friends for the first time, and then I wanted to go down black, and I went down a black diamond my first time skiing, and of course I was like literally on my butt the whole time, like scooting down. I was like, this, I don't know what I was thinking. But then, of course, I was upset with myself. I was like, what am I thinking? This isn't, this doesn't work. I'm no good at skiing. It's not my genes, something silly like that. But it's like, it's not like that. Like, things don't work
Yeah.
like that. They take time. And so you just have to understand and like reflect and like think about these things and not get so caught up in sort of like all these things that are out in front of you. It's like, okay, well, here I am in the moment. I'm just a little bit better. This is totally different from where I was before. And then, by the way, I'm totally toppling this limiting belief that I have about myself. I'm proving myself wrong.
Yeah.
So what else am I wrong about? you know?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. You know what's so funny about your example is I literally
Uh-huh.
had the exact same example in 6th grade. I went
Is
down
that
a
right?
black diamond
Yeah.
hill, didn't know what I was
So
doing,
funny.
ended up like hitting a tree and my ski went down the hill. And so then it takes a while for you to come back for that and say,
Mhm.
okay, I'm going to try again. And this time I'm just going to focus on standing up. like
Yeah, right.
I'm
I'm
just
just
going to
gonna
go on
do,
the bunny hill and I'm going to stand up.
pizza. Yeah, exactly. Pizza slice or whatever it's called. Like
yeah.
going down the hill, the bunny hill. Exactly. I'm gonna
Yeah.
stay on the bunny hill this time. Yeah.
Yeah. And then
It's so
eventually you're like,
funny.
oh, I can do this. I can at least stand up on skis. Like that's a
Right.
win.
It's like, come on, yeah. So we're hard
Oh,
on ourselves. That's the other thing too. It's like
we
just
are.
recognizing when we're so hard on ourselves, and it's okay to be gentle with yourself too. Like we have all these things where it's just like, oh, I want to, even with talking about this stuff too. It's like learning how to be gentle with yourself is also another thing. Like that is sometimes hard to do. So, but if we can just be gentle and be okay with this, like slow progress, and then we naturally extend that generosity and that gracefulness, the grace to other people too. Because I don't think we would ever be as hard on other people as we hard. It's so weird, like why we're so hard on ourselves. But it's like we would never be hard on somebody who didn't get skiing the first time they went skiing. I mean, come on. I mean, that's just it's funny.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know. The expectations that we have for ourselves sometimes are just outrageous.
Yeah, yeah.
So when you talk about being gentle with yourself, what does that mean to
Mhm.
you?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is like around sort of like negative, just like negative thought patterns and like understanding like when those kind of crop up. And that's one aspect. But I think another aspect is a little bit about what you said earlier on in our conversation is about like slowing down a little bit. Because we're in so like being graceful with yourself and gentle with yourself is just about like letting yourself like it's not like a flower just like immediately sprouts up and then all of a sudden there's its petals towards the sun. Like there's a process where it's just like gently sort of like growing and then eventually in the springtime you see the petals. Like this is all we are. We're just like kind of growing gracefully. And a lot of that is just like seeing that things they take time and giving yourself that opportunity to take a little bit of break. Take 5 seconds before you respond to something. That's being
Mm,
gentle with yourself because you don't have to react in the moment all the time. You can actually respond. And so when you get to that point that you're responding, that's how you start building out confidence, and you see how some of these things start to like layer on top of each other. And then also the other thing about being graceful is that, I'm doing this because everything works in waves. It's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're not going to have 20 steps. Maybe you will. Maybe you're lucky and you get 20 steps forward and no steps back. But it's like not looking at the step back as being I'm off the track. That's like literally part of the track is the 1 step back. So
Oh,
seeing
love
that like
that.
for what it is, it's like, oh, that's literally how it works. Get it?
Yeah.
Let's go with it. Because then you learn
Yeah.
from that 1 step and you integrate and then you keep moving. You know what I mean? And that's how you sort of like get over this, like just thinking that you're a failure. It's like once one thing happened that's wrong, I failed. Impossible. Impossible.
That is beautiful. Just the like setting the expectation for yourself that the path isn't going to go only forward. There's backward movement that's normal, that is expected. Everyone goes through it, like just normalizing the regression where
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
not
Just
always pushing ahead or to the next level
uh
or to the next height, but that there's some circuitous paths in there, and there's times where you're going to feel like you're moving backwards. And I really think you're right about like we don't allow ourselves that grace. Like we don't
mhm.
expect that, and then we just doubt ourselves when it happens instead of saying like, no, this is actually how the path is. It's
Yeah,
exactly what the
yeah.
path is.
Yeah, yeah. It's so funny, like the word
Hmm.
doubt. I was just thinking about that earlier today too, because it's like just the things that can get in our way, especially in leadership, like doubt, fear, um, regrets, like thinking about the past a lot, like those sort of feelings that kind of crop up. And the gracefulness is just not being harder on ourselves when we feel those things. It's just recognizing, like it's learning to recognize those feelings when they pop up. Like that's sort of like the whole kind of like learning process. It's like, oh, okay, I'm
Mm.
feeling a little bit doubtful. Why am I feeling doubtful? Okay, let me take a look at this.
Yeah. Or I'm sitting in regret. I keep coming
Mm-hmm.
back to regret about this thing. Like, what does that mean? Or how is that useful for me now? Like, is
Right.
it serving me? Is it for me? Uh,
Totally. Yeah. Is it
to move
serving? Yeah,
forward.
that's exactly it. That's a great way of thinking about it. Like, does it serve me or does it not? That's totally it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Eric, this has been so amazing. I feel like I could just talk to you all day about this topic. So maybe we'll have to do a regroup sometime in the future. This is
I would love
awesome.
that.
But I want to talk just a moment about your YouTube channel because I think a lot of the things that we talked about today, plus so much more goodness and positivity and, very, very helpful advice is out there. So, can you tell us a little bit more about your YouTube channel and maybe any of the other things that you offer around this topic that might
Yeah,
be interesting to my
absolutely.
listeners?
Yeah, sounds good. So yeah, I started a YouTube channel around 2.5 months ago, and I've built up a decent amount of videos thus far. But the videos are all about like kind of about these types of topics. So it's sort of reflecting on um, self worth, and so it's like this idea that you're always worthy, and so how to recognize that. So that's one aspect. Practical application. So yeah, it's one thing to say that you have self worth, but how do I actually feel it? And how do I sort of like nurture that feeling of self worth? Anxiety, like thinking about like, am I thinking too much about the future? I also like to talk about stuff like science and consciousness and like, okay, well, awareness, like what does it mean to be in presence? Like what does it actually feel like? In some ways, it runs a little bit of a gamut, but if you're interested in like, oh, I just want to live a happier life. Like, how do I actually do that? Or I want to be a better leader. Or I want to, maybe I'm stuck. I feel I'm stuck in life. So that's the types of videos that I'm making just about like, yeah, about awareness, about like forgiveness, forgiving yourself, like realizing that you're
Mm.
not your past. You're always held in the moment. And then like you're saying too, yeah, the services that I'm offering, I'm getting into life coaching. So if you're a person who is again thinking about life, or maybe you want a different direction in life, or like wondering what's going on, because I think sometimes we look outside of ourselves and we see a chaotic world, for sure. Like that's not, it
Yeah.
depends on the day. I'm not putting it lightly. And I think we need each other, and we need to figure out like how do we bring the light back into the world? How do we work together? Because I think a lot of this stuff is going to be from the ground up. I think we're going to have to ground up, figure out how to help heal some of these traumas that we have collectively, or figure out how to like just have more abundant, peaceful lives. So if you're interested, if anyone out there that's listening is interested, that's the service that I offer is life coaching.
Perfect. And I can just imagine like the benefit of having someone as positive as yourself kind of come alongside, add some accountability, help you really lift your thoughts and think about yourself in a different way. And so I just love that. I love that you're extending it into something that people can actually, reach out to you and have that one-on-one connection if they want.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, mindset. It's all about the mindset. Yeah,
Yeah.
yep.
So what's the name of your YouTube channel?
Sure. It's like my first and last name, Eric Montag at Eric Montag on YouTube.
Perfect. And that's
Yeah, first last name. T A.
Montag.
You got it.
Just
Sorry, Montag. Yes, that's right.
yes. Yes. Well, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for your time. I really
Yeah,
appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate you too, Christiana.
All
Well,
right. Take care.
all right. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Bye. So I think it is so awesome interviewing people like Eric. He just has this natural energy that comes out, and as you're having a conversation, like you sincerely feel the things that he talks about, that he truly believes them. And I just love how, he started as an anxious person. Like he's always dealt with these feelings of worthiness, trying to figure out how to find his place as a product leader. And yet, a lot of that work has really led him to become the person that he is today. In many ways, a very confident leader, a self assured leader, one that is able to help calm others, that is able to help bring them to a place that is more positive and open to creative ideas. And I can tell you from personal experience working with Eric, he just has a fantastic way of relating to people. And so the tips that he shared today, they actually work. They're really, really effective. And I wish that a lot more people could take that technique and just apply it to themselves during their leadership journey. So we talked about the idea behind figuring out your week and how to set your week up for success. So, no more Sunday scaries. We talked about biohacking and how you start connecting some of those positive thoughts with also things that can disrupt the nervous system jitters that you might be having, helping you feel more comfortable, helping you center your body in the same way that you are centering your mind. And then finally, we really dug into, what are those things that are holding us back on a deeper level, and being able to offer yourself more grace and forgive yourself and allow yourself to make mistakes and know that that's part of the process. And I just love that flow of the conversation because I think, as with all of us, as we're learning something new, we're always judging ourselves. We're really putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to get it perfect, to get it right the very first time, which is not how it works. And so, transparently, I'm doing my first video podcast. And so this is me putting myself out there and trying something new. And I don't expect it to be perfect. It won't be perfect the first time. And that's okay. And so I think Eric brings a fantastic mindset to this. And if you are interested, definitely go check out his YouTube channel. So again, that is Eric Montag, Montag, on YouTube for some really positive and uplifting videos and some more useful hacks and tips that you can use to help bring more joy back to your leadership. And also, if you need any life coaching, Eric, again, I think would be an amazing accountability partner there. So for this episode and for the show notes and everything that you need, go to worthytoleadpodcast.com/6. So worthytoleadpodcast.com/6. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe so that you can get all the new episodes as I release them. You can go to worthytoleadpodcast.com/subscribe. And I would really appreciate it if you would share this with your friends and the other leaders in your life who need to hear this. And with that, I wish you a wonderful day and best wishes on your journey to being the worthy leaders that I know you are. Bye for now.